We now know, after many, many years of research by numerous scholars, including myself, we know now that Sumerian literature consists primarily of epics, myths, hymns, laments.
The room smelled of dust, old paper, and time itself that had not been cleared in years. The blinds were half drawn, allowing thin ribbons of afternoon light to cut across the surface of ancient tablets etched with symbols older than memory.
Sumerian tablets are probably one of the oldest form of written record that we have. They've been translated, and they tell exciting stories about how gods intermingled with human beings and actually had a hand in the creation of human beings.
At the center of it all sat an old man whose hands trembled, not from fear, but from urgency. He had spent his entire life studying the language of the first cities, the first kings, the first recorded thoughts of humanity. And now, at the very end of that life, he believed he had uncovered something no one was meant to understand. For decades, the tablets had been dismissed as fragments of myth.
What we're looking at here is a Sumerian tablet that actually shows the tree of life, flanked by divine beings. You can see here the Anunnaki on each side. We also see the winged disc, a symbolic reference that the Anunnaki had the power of flight.
They were cataloged, photographed, stored, and forgotten. Discovered in a secondary excavation site near the ruins of a long-collapsed temple complex, they did not fit neatly into known Sumerian epics. Their inscriptions were inconsistent, their grammar was strange. Certain glyphs appeared to belong to different periods entirely, as though the clay had been reused or deliberately altered. Most scholars labeled them corrupted copies of older myths and moved on, but he had not moved on. He noticed patterns others ignored, recurring symbols that did not match traditional invocations to gods, references to cycles described not poetically, but mathematically. The text did not read like worship, it read like documentation. At first, he believed he was simply correcting centuries of misinterpretation. The ancient Sumerians, he argued in private notes, were not merely myth makers, they were observers, record keepers, chroniclers of events they did not fully understand but felt compelled to preserve. He began translating slowly, carefully, reconstructing broken lines from context and cross-referencing obscure dialect shifts. Then he reached the passages that made him stop sleeping. The tablets spoke of a time before the cities of Uruk and Eridu, before ziggurats and irrigation canals. They described a civilization that shone beneath the twin lights, a phrase that puzzled him until he realized it likely referred to a rare astronomical phenomenon. The text described structures aligned to the heavens with impossible precision. It spoke of knowledge given, withdrawn, and given again. But it did not call the givers gods. The word used was closer to overseers, or perhaps architects. The Sumerian term was layered, complex, implying authority without divinity. These beings were described as arriving after a great silence in the sky, bringing tools that hummed and stones that softened under sound. Humanity was shaped, guided, and corrected, not created from nothing, but adjusted. He told no one at first. His colleagues would have dismissed it as poetic metaphor, yet the tone of the tablets was wrong for myth. There were no grand battles, no moral lessons. Instead, there were measurements, time intervals marked with startling specificity, references to turnings that repeated every vast span of years. One night, cross-referencing star charts with the intervals described, he felt his breath catch in his throat. The cycles corresponded with known astronomical movements, precession, orbital fluctuations, events that modern science had only recently quantified. The tablets described a catastrophe linked to one of these cycles, a cleansing that returned the world to quiet waters and empty plains. It was not a flood story, it was a reset. According to the text, humanity had risen before, built before, reached heights that rivaled the architects themselves, and each time something in the sky signaled an end. The architects withdrew, the earth trembled, fire fell, waters rose, and silence returned. He translated faster after that, though his body began to fail him. His doctor warned him about stress, about rest. But how could he rest when the clay beneath his fingers seemed to pulse with urgency? The final sections were the most damaged, as if deliberately defaced. He pieced them together like a man assembling shards of a broken mirror. One passage described a watcher star that dimmed and brightened over immense periods. Another referenced a shadow crossing the path of the great light, altering tides and stirring the deep. He realized with mounting dread that these were not metaphors. They were observations of celestial mechanics. And then he reached the final intact lines. They did not describe the past. They described what was coming. The text stated that when the cycle turned again, when the heavens repeated their ancient alignment, the architects would not intervene as before. Humanity would face the correction alone. The phrasing was cold, almost clinical. A gardener stepping back to see which plants survived the frost. He felt paranoia creep into his thoughts. Why had these tablets been overlooked? Why had no one else pursued their anomalies? He began to suspect that perhaps others had, and had chosen silence. Funding for his independent research had dried up mysteriously months earlier. A promised lecture was abruptly canceled. Packages he mailed to fellow scholars went unanswered. Still, he worked. He recorded his translations in meticulous detail, speaking into an old audio device when his hands could no longer steady a pen. His voice grew weaker, but the words became sharper. He explained how the Sumerians may have inherited knowledge from a prior civilization, one that understood the sky with terrifying clarity. He outlined the correlation between the tablet cycles and upcoming astronomical events projected within decades. The most chilling line, once fully reconstructed, was brutally simple. The turning approaches, not in mythic time, not in some distant age, in measurable years. He calculated, recalculated, checked for error until his vision blurred. Each time, the numbers aligned. A convergence of celestial movements not seen since before recorded history. The same configuration the tablets described as preceding the last correction. In his final days, he rarely left the room. The world outside continued unaware, wrapped in digital distractions and political noise. Storms intensified across oceans. The Earth rumbled in places long thought stable. Scientists debated climate models and solar activity, unaware that ancient clay had already recorded similar patterns thousands of years ago. He wondered if the architects still watched, or if they had abandoned the experiment entirely. He stated plainly that the tablets were the tablets. His breathing was shallow, each word an effort pulled from deep within a failing chest. He stated plainly that the tablets were not religious allegory. They were warnings preserved through cultural memory, encoded so that only a civilization advanced enough to understand astronomy would grasp their meaning. He admitted he had once mocked fringe theories about lost civilizations and sky beings. Now he felt only regret. Not for skepticism, but for the delay in listening to the past. If the tablets were correct, humanity stood at the edge of another turning. Not necessarily a flood, not necessarily fire, but a correction driven by forces written into the mechanics of the cosmos itself. He urged whoever heard the recording to study the cycles, to prepare, to question why so many ancient cultures shared eerily similar accounts of destruction descending from the sky. He whispered that perhaps the greatest mistake was believing ourselves to be the first to stand here. His final words were almost lost in static. "We have been here before." Hours later, he was found slumped over the desk, fingers resting lightly on clay that had endured for millennia. His notes were boxed, his recordings archived. Official statements described his final work as speculative and unfinished, but the translations exist. Scholars who quietly reviewed his drafts admit, off record, that the linguistic consistency is difficult to dismiss. The astronomical correlations are unsettling. The damaged sections appear intentionally erased in antiquity, as though someone long ago feared the clarity of the message. In the years since his death, telescopes have recorded subtle anomalies in solar behavior, minor fluctuations, unusual patterns dismissed as statistical noise. Yet the cycles continue their slow, indifferent progression. The tablets never claimed certainty. They described probability, inevitability shaped by rhythm. The old scholar believed the Sumerians understood something we forgot, that civilization is fragile, balanced on cosmic timing beyond our control, that progress does not exempt us from recurrence. And somewhere, carved into clay long before empires rose and fell, is the quiet assertion that the sky remembers. If the turning approaches, it will not announce itself with trumpets. It will arrive as natural disaster, as shifting climate, as celestial coincidence explained away by comfortable narratives. The correction will appear random to those who do not know the pattern. The scholar knew the pattern. He died before he could publish it fully, before the academic world could tear it apart or confirm it, before the next alignment reached its precise mathematical peak. But the heavens move whether we believe in them or not. And the clay remains, waiting, waiting. The clay does not decay the way paper does. It does not burn easily, does not dissolve with a careless spill of water. It endures. That was the quiet brilliance of the first scribes. They They pressed their warnings into earth itself, then hardened it with fire, as if they understood that whatever they were preserving needed to survive more than kingdoms. It needed to survive amnesia. In the months after the scholar's death, his office was cleared with clinical efficiency. University representatives cataloged his materials, transferring the tablets back into controlled storage. His personal annotations were digitized. The audio recordings were archived under restricted access. Officially, nothing extraordinary had been found. The public summary described his final work as an exploration of cyclical motifs in late Sumerian cosmology. Cosmology, a word soft enough to blunt the edge of what he had uncovered. Yet among the junior researchers tasked with organizing his estate, a quiet unease began to spread. They listened to fragments of his recordings out of curiosity. They saw the calculations he had scribbled in margins, astronomical projections cross-referenced against ancient intervals. They noticed that he had circled certain future dates repeatedly, as if hoping the numbers would change. They did not change. One of those researchers, a doctoral candidate who had once idolized the old man, made copies, not to leak, not to publish, simply to protect the work from disappearing into obscurity. She had watched how quickly inconvenient theories could be reframed as eccentricities. She had seen how funding bodies preferred stability over disruption, and something about the tone of the final recordings unsettled her too deeply to ignore. It was not hysteria she heard in his voice. It was resignation. He had sounded like a man who finally understood a pattern too large to stop. As years passed, the world outside academia continued its relentless acceleration. Cities expanded, satellites multiplied in orbit, artificial intelligence mapped human behavior with unnerving precision. Humanity congratulated itself on mastery over nature, on predictive climate models, and planetary defense initiatives. And yet the anomalies persisted. Solar observatories began reporting irregularities in magnetic behavior. Nothing catastrophic, nothing that demanded emergency broadcasts, but enough to prompt closed-door conferences. Geophysicists observed subtle shifts in tectonic stress distributions, patterns that defied easy explanation. Oceanographers noted temperature deviations in deep currents rarely discussed outside specialist journals. Individually, each anomaly could be rationalized. Together, they formed a murmur. The doctoral candidate, no longer a student now, but a lecturer with limited influence, returned often to the copied translations. She rechecked the linguistic foundations of the old scholar's claims. The grammar held. The unusual phrasing in the tablets was deliberate. Repetition of certain glyph clusters indicated emphasis, not corruption. The astronomical intervals, once recalculated with updated data, aligned even more precisely than before. One passage in particular haunted her. It described the silent interval before the trembling, a span when the world would appear stable, even prosperous. Crops would grow, cities would flourish, leaders would boast of permanence. The architects, according to the text, would observe without intervention, measuring whether humanity had learned from prior cycles. The line that followed was chilling in its detachment. If not, the sky will rebalance. Not punish, rebalance. The distinction mattered. Punishment implied morality. Rebalancing implied physics. She began quietly sharing fragments of the translations with trusted colleagues in astronomy and geology. She avoided the more sensational language, focusing instead on the mathematical correspondences. Most responded with polite skepticism. A few admitted discomfort at how closely certain projected alignments mirrored the ancient intervals described. One astrophysicist, after reviewing her summary, confided that a particular long-period celestial body had exhibited slight orbital irregularities. Nothing threatening, nothing that suggested imminent impact, but enough to complicate gravitational models over extended timescales. The tablets had mentioned a wanderer, a body that returned after vast absence, disturbing tides and stirring fire beneath the crust. Modern science knew of many such objects: comets, dwarf planets, distant companions barely detectable at the edge of instrumentation. None were currently on collision courses, yet gravitational influence did not require collision to alter a world. As global temperatures edged upward and storms grew more violent, public discourse remained divided. Climate change was debated, politicized, reframed. Renewable energy targets were set and missed. International agreements rose and collapsed. But beneath those human arguments, the planet responded to forces older than industry. Volcanic activity increased incrementally along certain fault lines. Minor quakes rippled through regions long considered stable. Insurance markets adjusted quietly. Governments updated contingency plans without fanfare. The lecturer listened again to the scholar's final dawn recording. His frail voice had cracked when he spoke of arrogance, not moral arrogance, but temporal arrogance. The assumption that recorded history encompassed the totality of human experience. The belief that progress moved only forward, never looping back through ruin. He had whispered that the greatest evidence was not in myth, but in sediment. Layers of abrupt change, civilizations that appeared fully formed as if rising from ashes not yet remembered. Archaeological gaps where complexity seemed to re-emerge without clear origin. The tablets, he insisted, were a bridge across one of those gaps. Years turned. The predicted alignment approached its calculated midpoint. Astronomers announced a rare convergence of orbital positions among several major bodies. Media outlets celebrated it as a spectacle for backyard telescopes. Graphics depicted elegant arcs of light across the solar system. Few noticed the quieter bulletins regarding intensified solar flares during the same window. Fewer still connected them to the spike in grid instability reported across multiple continents. Power outages flickered through major cities in seemingly unrelated incidents. Communication satellites required unscheduled recalibrations. Airlines rerouted flights due to unexpected radiation readings at high altitudes. Individually manageable, collectively unsettling. The lecturer stood one night on her apartment balcony, looking up at a sky hazed by urban glow. She wondered what the Sumerian scribes had felt when they watched their own heavens shift. Did they understand the mechanics, or only the consequence? Another line from the tablets surfaced in her mind. When the lights dance in anger, seek stone and water. Practical advice, not prophecy. She began drafting a paper, careful, restrained, grounded in linguistic analysis. She avoided apocalyptic language. She framed the work as an examination of ancient astronomical record-keeping. Yet even in academic prose, the implications lingered between sentences. Before she could submit it, a geomagnetic storm, stronger than any in recent decades, surged across the planet. Auroras appeared at latitudes unaccustomed to such displays. Power grids faltered, transformers burned. For days, portions of the world functioned on backup systems. Experts assured the public that infrastructure would adapt. It did, but at cost. Financial markets shuddered. Supply chains hiccuped. Confidence, that fragile currency of modern civilization, wavered slightly. In the archives, the clay tablets remained undisturbed, temperature-controlled, inert. Yet their message no longer felt dormant. The lecturer visited them once more, requesting access under the guise of comparative research. She stood before the case, staring at the etched symbols. They looked almost primitive to untrained eyes, simple wedges pressed into earth. And yet those wedges had carried memory across 5,000 years. She traced the air just above one fragment, following the line that had first unnerved the old scholar. The turning approaches. Outside, headlines debated policy and profit. Markets rose again. Reconstruction efforts restored damaged grids. Humanity adapted as it always had. Perhaps adaptation was the lesson. Perhaps the correction was not extinction, but humility. The tablets had never guaranteed annihilation. They described narrowing paths, outcomes shaped by preparedness as much as inevitability. The lecturer no longer felt paralyzed by dread. Instead, she felt responsibility. If the cycle was real, if celestial mechanics imposed periodic trials upon the planet, then awareness was an advantage ancient civilizations may not have fully possessed. She organized quiet interdisciplinary meetings. Astronomers, climatologists, historians. She presented data without sensationalism. Some rolled their eyes, others leaned forward. Preparation did not require belief in architects. It required acknowledging vulnerability. As the alignment window peaked, another solar event erupted, brief, intense. Communication disruptions cascaded for hours, yet global systems held, strained but intact. News cycles moved on, life resumed its rhythm. But deep beneath oceans, tectonic plates continued their slow negotiation. In the outer reaches of the solar system, distant bodies traced their elongated paths, cycles within cycles. The old scholar had feared humanity would ignore the warning. Perhaps he underestimated it. Civilization did not collapse overnight. There was no singular cataclysm to validate prophecy. Instead, there was pressure, persistent, escalating, forcing innovation or failure. The lecturer published her paper at last. It sparked controversy, debate, fascination. She was criticized for drawing connections across disciplines. She was praised for intellectual courage. Most importantly, the tablets were no longer forgotten. Research into ancient sediment layers intensified. Funding expanded for solar monitoring. Infrastructure upgrades accelerated under the rationale of resilience rather than fear. The sky did not fall, but neither did it remain unchanged. And somewhere in the vastness above, indifferent to human interpretation, the mechanics continued. Whether architects once guided those mechanics no longer seemed the central question. The question was whether humanity could endure them consciously. The clay had endured. Now it was humanity's turn. Endure and remember. That became the quiet shift in thinking among those who had studied the tablets closely. Not fear, not fatalism, memory. In the years that followed the Great Geomagnetic Storm, investment in planetary monitoring expanded at a pace few would have predicted a decade earlier. Solar observatories multiplied, deep space tracking arrays were upgraded, international coalitions formed around infrastructure hardening, not because of any single prophecy, but because vulnerability had become undeniable. The lecturer often wondered what the old scholar would have thought if he had lived to see it. He had feared dismissal. Instead, the world was slowly arriving at similar conclusions through independent necessity. Extreme weather events increased in clustering, if not always in scale. Regions once considered temperate experienced sudden volatility. Agricultural patterns shifted northward. Coastal cities poured billions into sea barriers and adaptive architecture. Engineers spoke in terms of resilience curves and stress thresholds. The language was modern. The anxiety was ancient. During one closed symposium, an astrophysicist presented new data on long-term orbital modeling. Subtle gravitational interactions between outer bodies suggested periodic fluctuations in solar output that were only now being understood. The cycles extended beyond recorded history. Some aligned eerily with paleoclimatic disruptions embedded in ice cores. No one mentioned the tablets in that room. They did not need to. The lecturer sat quietly, recalling the phrase etched into clay, "When the great light wavers, the deep answers." At the Oceanographic Institute across the continent, researchers were documenting deep current oscillations with unprecedented clarity. The ocean did answer changes in solar input, slowly, powerfully. Civilization responded in increments. Energy grids decentralized. Data centers hardened against radiation spikes. Satellite networks diversified to reduce cascade failures. Governments framed these shifts as modernization, not precaution. But precaution it was. The lecturer's work evolved from translation to integration. She collaborated with climate scientists, offering ancient observational records as supplementary data points rather than mystical warnings. Surprisingly, some correlations held statistical weight. Not proof of architects, not proof of resets, proof that ancient observers had been attentive, and that attentiveness had preserved pattern recognition across millennia. The cultural impact was subtler but profound. Documentaries revisited early civilizations not as naive mythmakers, but as sophisticated skywatchers. Museums recontextualized exhibits, emphasizing empirical observation embedded within spiritual language. The boundary between myth and measurement blurred in productive ways. Students began asking different questions, not whether the ancients believed in gods descending from the sky, but what natural phenomena inspired such narratives. What cyclical disasters shaped collective memory so deeply that they were encoded into story and ritual. In that shift, the tablets found new life. One evening, as another moderate solar flare illuminated polar skies, the lecturer replayed the final recording once more. The old scholar's voice no longer sounded desperate. It sounded resolved. "We have been here before." Perhaps he had meant psychologically as much as physically. Humanity confronting limits, humanity mistaking stability for permanence, humanity rediscovering humility through disruption. Years passed without global catastrophe. There were hardships, yes, regional collapses, economic realignments, political upheavals triggered by resource strain, but there was also adaptation at a scale unseen in prior centuries. Vertical farms replaced failing croplands. Floating infrastructure redefined coastlines. Energy storage breakthroughs reduced dependence on vulnerable transmission corridors. International disaster response became faster, more coordinated. The cycle, if it was unfolding, was not a singular blow. It was a test of flexibility. In private moments, the lecturer allowed herself one speculative thought. If architects had once intervened, if some intelligence had nudged humanity through prior thresholds, perhaps non-intervention was not abandonment. Perhaps it was graduation. The tablets had said the architects would step back. Not depart, step back. As if waiting to see whether the creation could stabilize itself. Another alignment window approached, smaller than the last but still statistically notable. This time, preparations were routine. Satellites entered protective modes automatically. Power grids adjusted load distribution in advance of forecasted solar variability. Communication networks shifted frequencies preemptively. The flare came. It passed. Minimal disruption. In control rooms across continents, engineers exhaled. On her balcony, the lecturer looked up at a sky, still carrying faint auroral residue at unusual latitude. She felt no dread now, only awareness. The clay tablets remained in their case, but replicas circulated widely among academic institutions. High-resolution scans allowed students worldwide to study the wedge marks firsthand. The once obscure fragments had become foundational references in discussions of ancient scientific thought. Perhaps that was the true meaning of rebalance. Not annihilation, but recalibration. Pressure applied until adaptation occurred. In deep geological strata, evidence of prior abrupt transitions still waited to be fully understood. Humanity had not solved every mystery. It had not mapped every celestial variable. And in climate-controlled silence, clay, older than memory, continued to testify, not of inevitable doom, but of cycles survived, lessons relearned, and a species slowly recognizing that endurance depends not on dominance, but on remembering the patterns written above and below. The turning had not destroyed them, it had awakened them.